Good morning, USA, and welcome to another episode of the Bernie or Bust Show. Unshaved, unbathed, unedited, and unscripted. Got some coffee? Have some yourself? Pull up a chair and enjoy. We're getting back to school almost, and so my schedule will be changing a little bit as we're going forward. I'll try to get to the show every day, though. I may not always be unshaved and unbathed, but I hope you'll forgive me. So, what are we doing today? No ifs, ands, or buts. Only Bernie Sanders is serious about the real needs of the working class and can defeat Donald Trump. This is a new article, hot off the press. We're going to start with we have a multi-pronged argument today. So we're going to start with Professor Richard Wolff, and he wrote an article and he also made a video. I'm going to jump in his video to about 20 minutes and let you hear one of his prongs, and then I'll jump back to other ones.
And so the working class fractured, and the Republicans were able to make real gains, to be the champion of white against black, to be the champion of the male worker on the job, less the women. You could see the whole modern identity politics being born in this onslaught to undo the New Deal. And what did the Democratic Party do? Did it go to their roots and say, no, we're going to be the united working class? No. They didn't know how to fight this battle. They too were hobbled. They didn't rely on their left wing because those were tarred with the brush of communism and socialism. So they fell for that kind of splitting, and they split. So a new generation of Democrats, led by people like Bill Clinton, emerged, who said, okay, if we can't hold on to the working class, maybe we can keep our party going by appealing to the capitalists. The party not of Franklin Roosevelt, but the party of the other side. If the Republicans split the working class and hurt us, we'll split the capitalist class and pull over a bunch of them to support us. And what you have is the result. Two political parties, both of whom begging for money from the rich and the powerful and the capitalists, and each of them with a hand on part of the working class. The Republicans more and more white and male, and the Democrats more and more female, non-white, minority, the modern picture that we're used to. But both parties unwilling and unable to challenge capitalism because they depend on the same funders. They depend on the same support from that part. They could not maintain their oppositional position that
They could not maintain their oppositional position. In other words, they were no longer opposition to greed, to wealth. So the gist of this whole multi-pronged argument is that it's coming down again to class warfare. It's coming down again to the poor versus the rich. The political parties are split and represent, well, both of them now represent the rich completely, and the poor have no representation. Neither Democrats nor Republicans represent the working class poor, the working class middle class, and minorities and women. Nobody's speaking for them. We're all about the Vanderbilts now and the Rockefellers. So this is a quote from the article of the guy that was just talking. The U.S. working class was shocked 3 times in quick succession. First, the promise of rising standards of living was now definitively broken. Wages were flat, debt levels had reached unsustainable levels, and families and households were exhausted. The postponed reality of an American dream fading out of reach began to sink in. Second, the working class watched Republicans and Democrats falling over one another in and after 2008 to give big finance and big business every possible taxing, spending, and regulatory support, mostly at taxpayer expense. Concerns about deficits, long a staple of conservatives, disappeared. The idea of boosting the economy from below disappeared as well. Everything was trickle-down economics, no matter how little trickled. Millions of underwater homeowners were promised help that never arrived. The final blow came when, after trillions had been spent to revive a near-dead capitalist class, the problem of rising deficits was rediscovered to rationalize an austerity program for the masses. The three shocks proved too much for large sections of the U.S. working class, and that's where we are now. The working class has had it. They're fed up. Crystal Ball, commentator for The Hill, shows in this clip how voters contrast Elizabeth Warren with Bernie Sanders. She went on Twitter and she asked people this question: wondering if you can all help me figure something out. So Warren and Sanders have a fair amount of overlap ideologically, but have very different coalitions. I'm wondering why. It's a really good research question. If you are a Sanders supporter and really can't stand Warren, or vice versa, could you tell me why? And then she picked out this guy or this girl. I have to look carefully. Whoever it is, she picked out this Twitter follower of hers as a representation of many. And so qualitatively, she was saying this snapshot speaks truth to the bigger picture. In one word, labor. Warren wants to redistribute through top-down bureaucracy. Sanders wants to democratize political power. So Warren wants to use her plan to fix what the rest of the world thinks is broken. She's trying to use bureaucratic solutions to redistribute wealth, but the power stays where it is. The power stays in the hands of the robber barons. Sanders wants to democratize the power so that the people can call their own shots. And that's the difference between Sanders' economic Bill of Rights and Warren's economic patriotism. And her idea is that the robber barons will just figure out that what they're doing is harming people and will agree to stop doing that. And she wags her finger at them, but I don't think that's going to do very much. And neither do the people that Crystal Ball was interacting with on Twitter. Sanders wants to put the power in the hands of the people. He wants the people to determine their own fate as opposed to leaving the current leaders at the helm and trusting them to make the needed changes. In current polling, Warren's demographics bear out this idea. I've talked about this previously. So Sanders has a majority of those earning less than $50,000, or he has more of those voters. And I'll let you read this yourself. But one clear fact jumps out. Sanders supporters are less wealthy and less privileged on the whole. Looking specifically at income and education, two key indicators of class orientation and access to social mobility, it's clear which candidate is supported by the poor and working class. Now we jump to French economist Thomas Piketty, author of the best-selling book Capital in the 21st Century. Piketty also wrote Brahmin Left versus Merchant Right, Rising Inequality and the Changing Structure of Political Conflict. And he's looked at the last 70 years in Britain, in France, in the United States of post-election surveys, and he is seeing that the only way to unite poor and poorly educated voters who 70 years or more ago would typically have voted only for leftist parties is to rally them around the idea that they are voting against the interests of the wealthy few and in favor of the interests of the working class generally. So he's trying, even though they've been indoctrinated into believing, because of the divide and conquer tactics of both political parties, that they should blame immigrants or they should blame people of other races or from other countries, immigrants, right? He's instead of the blame game, he's teaching them that they should focus their blame upward. He's not just teaching them this, they're figuring it out. That's what all of his data show. And he has collected piles and piles of data. If you look into his work, he has crunched the numbers. He has lots of numbers to back his thesis up, that the current picture, the current political picture, shows that that's the only issue now. As many shiny objects as get waved in our faces, the real issue is the interests of the wealthy few versus the interests of the working class. That's what it's all boiled down to right now. Add to this the war on youth described by Henri Giroux, where young people, especially poor youth of color, are increasingly disenfranchised, and the differences between Bernie Sanders and any other Democrat are increasingly apparent. As the United States increasingly models its schools after prisons and subjects children to a criminal legal system marked by severe class and racial inequities, it becomes clear that such children are no longer viewed as a social investment, but as suspects. Under a neoliberal regime in which some children are treated as criminals and increasingly deprived of decent health care, education, food, and housing, it has become clear that the United States has both failed its children and democracy itself. Only Sanders speaks to this problem in a way that voters can perceive as substantive and not merely more of the lip service that both political parties have served up over the last 70 years. Sanders speaks directly to young people without being condescending or patronizing, and his poll results demonstrate clearly that they trust him far more than they trust any other presidential candidate. Here is from an article, teenvogue.com. This is Bernie speaking. Young people are facing an unusual moment in American history, and that is not only the issue of climate change. It is not only racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, religious bigotry. It is the reality that your generation will, for the first time in modern history, have a lower standard of living than your parents. So then we say, well, okay, there's another piece to the puzzle. And people then ask, well, all these young people showing up for rallies, all these young people yelling and screaming that they love Bernie Sanders, will they actually show up when they are needed in the primaries and the caucuses? In a Daily Beast article, Sanders again differentiates himself from the field. On Saturday, back in April, the end of April 2019, the campaign launched a nationwide organizing program with nearly 5,000 house parties in every state throughout the country, demonstrating a show of force for his volunteer network and an opportunity to mobilize supporters in a primary contest that could remain close through the early voting states and beyond. If we're going to defeat Donald Trump, we're going to need a massive grassroots effort, and that's what today is about, Sanders told the Daily Beast in an interview on Saturday. Our job is to significantly increase our citizen participation, and we think the agenda that we are fighting for, an agenda that works for all of us and not just the 1%, is an agenda that can bring millions of people together to transform our economic and political life. In addition to the house parties, which Sanders spent part of the day calling into, the campaign also launched a new app called Burn, which will be crucial to their strategy going forward. It allows for volunteers themselves to log conversations with voters, friends, and family for the purpose of ensuring voter registration and getting Sanders supporters to participate in primaries and caucuses. So I've heard that this million plus people army for Sanders will also even drive out with all of these connections on cell phones. They can get messages from people who need a ride to the polling place. They can get these people to the polls. So the people that I'm speaking of are the ones Piketty mentioned. The poor and the poorly educated are going to be mobilized by this huge army of Bernie Sanders. Now, another piece to the puzzle. An elephant in the room, at least when speaking to traditional Democrats, is the number of Sanders supporters, especially in swing states, who will vote directly for Donald Trump if Bernie Sanders is not nominated, by the DNC. Roughly 20% of Sanders voters would rather vote for Trump if Warren, Harris, or Buttigieg win from the Daily Kos. Add to this number, and this is from the exit polling in the 2016 election, about 12% did vote directly for Donald Trump from the 2016 election. Add to that those who will stay home or vote third party, and you are faced with the statistical certainty that there is no other candidate, at least any polling over single digits, who can possibly mount a serious challenge to Donald Trump. %20 of Bernie's supporters won't vote for anyone else if he loses the primary. They'll either stay home or they'll vote Green Party or Socialist Party or some other third party. Now, the last piece of the puzzle. Many mainline Democrats say they will vote blue no matter who, even though they may be on the wrong side, ideologically speaking, of Piketty's class struggle and would otherwise prefer a neoliberal candidate. So if you add that to all the other pieces of the puzzle, this tribalistic tendency to see anyone who is running as Democrat as better than Donald Trump adds even more fuel to the fire, because Democrats have said they care more about winning or defeating Donald Trump than ideology. They don't have any other issue. They're not even single issue voters. They're just defeat Donald Trump at all costs. So that adds a lot of leverage to the other people on the left, who the so-called left. Hardly anybody's really left anymore, but that's a different video. But if you add those components together, there's no way to hold all those components together unless you figure out that Bernie Sanders is the glue. He's the only possibility. It's not going to be Joe Biden. It's not going to be Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, Beto O'Rourke, and not the faux progressive Elizabeth Warren, because working class voters don't perceive them to be on their side. This contest will be decided by voters' conclusions as to who will be most able and willing to right the economic wrongs of the last 70 years. If the mainline Democrats who care more about victory than ideology can see the writing on the wall in time, they may be able to shift their support before rather than after the primary process. And if we can get young people and poorly educated people to the polls, that also might give Bernie a chance against the already rigged primary process. But either way, there's only one conclusion. Only Bernie Sanders can defeat Donald Trump.